Story 1. Posted an advertisement for $160 per hour offering blowjobs and put up a few pictures. Got at least a dozen messages on the first day and another dozen over the next week. Honestly, it freaked me out, so I didn't do a job until a few days ago. I traveled 20 minutes to meet him in his apartment, slipped by some people leaving, and found his number before walking into his apartment. Calm, classy music was playing, kind of jazzy, and it smelled like cinnamon and citrus. Overall, it was a great atmosphere. He was surprised to see me and took my coat off. He dabbles in baking and offered me some of a pastry he was working on. I declined in fear of any possible taint. We talked for maybe 15 minutes about everything from work to politics before making out for a few minutes. He then showed me upstairs, and we had pretty vanilla sex with no penetration. He let me shower, we had a smoke, and talked some more. In the end, I tried his pastry, despite being quite averse to almost every sweet. I was pleasantly surprised by how the pastry was, and he tipped me well, $200 in a little over an hour. Went straight home and bought $100 in Warframe currency. Story 2. I lived in Bangkok for some time. I earned very little money and had a bad habit of partying too much. I ended up with an older, married, Thai lady. Every time her husband was out of the city for business, I would entertain her. She would pay my rent, buy me luxury presents, and give me spending money. Story 3. I did a photo shoot for one of my good friends who happens to be gay. He has around 200,000 followers on his photography page, which mostly features shirtless men. Anyway, the photo shoot went fairly well considering it was my first time, and we got some good shots of my upper body and arms. He ended up sharing it on his social media accounts, and before I knew it, I was getting random friend requests and follows from people I didn't know. I accepted most of them, and one night while I was drunk at a poker tournament, a person messaged me asking for a pair of my dirty boxers for $100. He would throw in an extra $50 if there was a fresh load in them. I thought about it for about 15 minutes and decided to go through with it. I continued selling him my used boxers for a couple of weeks until he started getting more and more aggressive, begging me to let him perform oral sex. Story 4. Stripped for a couple of years. I danced primarily for men, but women did come in on weekends. I learned a lot about gender dynamics, which I use to this day. Women are way hornier after a couple of shots, but are the rudest and cheapest. Men won't even look at you if they aren't interested, but if they are, they will drop hundreds at a time. It was fun overall, though I would never go back, but I'll always share the lessons learned. Story 5. I was asked to help an older woman with her computer through a couple I knew from work. I was in my early 20s at the time, and she was in her late 50s or early 60s. Played out like a bad romance novel. Fixing the computer was just a pretense to get me alone with her. It started with her pressing against me as I sat at the computer. Then she opened a folder of graphic photos she'd taken of herself. My initial embarrassment turned to shock as she kept cycling through more photos, saying, "Oh no! Oh my! I can't believe you're seeing these." She wasn't exactly unattractive. She just hadn't registered as a sexual being to me. She was unremarkable as an older woman, and I was more than 3 decades her junior. I awkwardly excused myself and said I had to go. She apologized profusely and put cash in my coat pocket as I put on my boots. She begged me not to tell her neighbors or my friends and kept apologizing. A little over a month later, she started contacting me again. She left several voicemails on my phone and eventually got my friends to pressure me into helping her again, or so I thought. When I finally went back, she revealed that she just wanted to talk and clear things up. She turned out to be a profoundly lonely woman who was too timid to start dating again. We talked for over an hour, and I grew more comfortable. She had 2 adult daughters and a gay ex-husband. At one point, she started undressing while I sat at her kitchen table. She said she just wanted someone to see her naked and asked me not to leave. I felt sorry for her, so I stayed. She ended up being intimate with me while I sat in the chair. I made another awkward departure with her thanking me, apologizing, and putting cash in my pocket again. Over time, I visited her more frequently with less prompting. It wasn't until my 5th visit that we were actually intimate. I wasn't attracted to her physically, but I did feel sorry for her. She did have decades of unsatisfied sexual energy and was insatiable. This went on for almost 9 months until I got a girlfriend. Breaking it off was hard on her, but thankfully it didn't get very messy. On the plus side, I saw her later while out with my girlfriend. We were waiting to be seated for dinner when she passed by with a date. I saw her coming and had a few seconds to prepare for the encounter. She was visibly flustered but made brief, pleasant small talk. My girlfriend wanted to know how I knew her. I was nervous but told her the truth. She was a neighbor of Jules and Harry's that I used to help out from time to time. My girlfriend intimated that the lady wanted to be with me. It was so obvious. I was anxious throughout most of dinner. Story 6. Broke, disowned, and 22. I started doing pay-to-play on gay dating apps. I made a bit of money at it, but I stopped when a client robbed me and then stalked me for 6 months. Story 7. When I was 18, I discovered that I liked being an exhibitionist on free webcam sites. I considered myself straight since I was only attracted to women, but anonymous compliments were addictive to someone with really low self-esteem, so I wasn't very picky about who was watching me. One guy, in particular, was really interested in me and offered to give me a very expensive snowboard if I drive to meet him at his downtown hotel. The deal was we didn't have to do anything sexual, I just had to drive to meet him, have a few drinks, and I would get the snowboard. We met at the hotel bar, and he ended up being a normal, fairly charismatic guy with a really good job. That actually surprised me, as I'd gone in half expecting his online personality to be a complete act. A couple of drinks at the bar turned into half a bottle in his hotel room, and eventually he made an additional offer that if I spent the night naked in his bed, he'd increase the deal to $1,000 in total. We had another drink, and I agreed to sleep there naked but nothing more. The offer was later increased a couple more times. Turns out, while I like women, I liked having a top-of-the-line snowboarding setup even more. Story 8. When I was 17, I was seeing this girl who had really religious parents, so we couldn't have sex in her house or even be alone together. She would take me to this athletic club and pay for me to get in. My family was very poor, and I had football practice after school, leaving little time for a job, so my money went to helping with bills. She would pay for me, and we would go to a single-person locker room and have sex. When we were finished, she would leave and I would stay to play basketball or swim. Story 9. Got picked up in my early 20s by an older woman in her 40s at a trendy bar in the early 2000s. She drove me home to her large house about 40 minutes away in the suburbs. Divorced. We had a drink and then she asked me to go down on her 3 times for about an hour. Afterwards, she freshened up, and I thought I was about to get the ride of my life. Instead, she called me a cab. Super pissed. As she walked me to the front door, she told me she would call me. I told her not to bother. She could see that I was upset and handed me a folded piece of paper with her number written on the outside. I just stuck it in my pocket. The next morning, I'm doing laundry and pull out the paper. 5 $100 bills inside the fold. Summary. Thought I was hooking up with an attractive older woman. Got paid for oral by a divorcee with her ex-husband's money. Story 10. I was a stripper, so I guess that counts. A coworker of mine got me into it. The money was insane, so I stuck with it for a year. I wouldn't do it again, but I learned a lot about women that year. Story 11. How do I find out if I am attractive enough to get paid for this? Edit fine. Private message for the photos. Edit 2. Okay, the general consensus is that only a few people said they would pay me to sleep with me and a bunch of nice compliments that I assume meant not for money. I am happy with my results. Thank you all. Story 12. Okay, this is going to be a bit of a long story. Ask anything you want, by the way. I'll gladly answer anything that isn't specific enough to identify me. I had just finished university in the United Kingdom when I was told of a girl by a friend, my ex-housemate's current housemate, who was an escort. It was typical gossip from her, and while I'm not one to fan such flames, I will gladly let people talk. She told me that she always has really expensive clothes and that her prices were around 120 to 150 pounds an hour, with it being significantly more for stayovers. I was skeptical if I'm honest and didn't know much about it at all at the time. My interest was piqued, and when I finally did meet her, let's call her P, I found a way to ask a lot of questions, culminating in asking if there were any heterosexual male escorts, and if so, how do I become one? She said she'd probably have to sleep with me. I laughed at the joke, but that she'd speak to the bosses of the agency, a man and a woman, let's call them H&T respectively, who were ex-escorts themselves and were now partners. So, after a few nights out and nights around at my ex-housemates, we're kind of friends with a bit of tension. P is an odd one and frequently comes over to my house after jobs simply to cuddle and fall asleep with me in bed. Now, just to reiterate, I'm a heterosexual male, so when a woman comes over to my house and jumps into bed with me just to cuddle, I kind of struggle with knowing if that's true, if it's a game within a game, etc. I spoke to her about it one time and she said that after the night's out or in she just wants intimacy and friendship but isn't looking for sex. She also said if that's how I feel at the time, I should push the envelope a bit and see what's what. So, a while goes past, and I'm getting weirded out by the chase me antics by P, and as she's sending what I'm taking to be mixed messages, I'm starting to feel like a fool. Next time I'm around at my friend's house and I'm in her territory, I push the envelope enough and we end up sleeping together. Not too long after this, P gets me a sit-down lunch date with H, the female boss. P comes along too. We have coffee, something to eat and just chat away, flirt, crack jokes, and just be calm about the whole thing. After a while, T turns to P and just says, "So how is he in bed?" Rather matter-of-factly, like I'm not there. I feel the blood rush out of my face and my stomach turn. P replies with a positive enough remark and I get offered a trial, but they'll need to put my picture up on their website. They did have a website. It was rather a tight ship, if I'm honest, and I was surprised about how legitimate it was and what was expected of the employees. So I go get my pictures taken in my underwear, front and back. They blur the face and I get given a name to use. I get given the driver's number, the company driver who would take us to our outcalls and act as a bit of security for the girls occasionally, and the address of the in-call location in the city center, which I had to book ahead of time. This was the company-owned location where we could take the client if the client wasn't taking us out for a night. The whole place was packed with drinks and recreational drugs. My first fortnight I worked there, I must have cleared about 2,000 pounds in wages and tips. It was all cash. It was a surreal experience, and I'm very glad for it. After my new guy charm wore off, it settled down to about 500 pounds a week, possibly a bit more. Male escorts didn't get paid as much. I quit working after about 3 months. I left for love, but it didn't work out. Story 13. Well, when I met my future wife, neither of us could hang out at our own places. So we used to go to bars, and eventually she would always end up paying for a room so we could be intimate. I didn't have a job at the time, and I figured she must be fairly well off. Turns out she wasn't, but apparently I was worth it at the time. We're getting divorced now. Story 14. After a series of unfortunate circumstances, I had no other choice. I let a few random old men have their way for a few £100s that got me out of some serious financial troubles. I'm straight. I'm pretty sure I'm suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, but at least I'm not homeless. Story 15. Many years ago, when I was in the Air Force, I was a security police officer working at the main gate. I would frequently get hit on by the officers' wives and would go out on dates with them. One time, a girl around my age at the time, 21, stopped and talked to me for about 30 minutes. After talking, she offered me $50 to come strip at her friend's bachelorette party. I was young, in shape, and had nothing better to do, so I agreed to it. It was a very strange experience. She went ahead and gave me the $50, then left. I had thought about just pocketing the money but was intrigued. After my shift, I went to my dorm room, showered, and drank a lot of alcohol, then went to her house off base. There were 7 women there, including the bride and the girl who invited me. Apparently, my presence was a surprise to nearly everyone there. Immediately, they were all over me. They would shove money down my pants and pull me from one to another, trying to grab me. I never got a chance to dance, which is pretty good since I couldn't dance to save my life, but I ended the night with about $400. The women were not attractive. A few of them were substantially overweight. They were drunk and did not care about me as a human at all. I was nothing more than a piece of meat. At 43 years old and overweight now, it was a pretty great experience, but at 21, I was pretty terrified. I had more encounters than I could keep up with, had people getting close to me, and I was uncomfortable. Had I been a woman at a men's party, I am pretty sure I would have been able to report it to the police as being assaulted. I drank myself into a blackout that night and woke up naked on the bathroom floor covered in vomit. I'm not 100% convinced it was my own, either. I grabbed the clothes that I could find and got out of the house. I would see the girl who hired me from time to time as she traveled on base, but we never spoke again, and I haven't told this story to anyone for many years.